So I've been looking for reasons why people don't like certain warframes, and in this video I'm going to be looking at Ember. Now before I start, I'm going to add that most people don't like Ember simply because they're older players. Now Ember gets a lot of hate from older players because they remember what she was like before the nerf. And the nerf happened 8 whole years ago at this point. It happened in February 2018, and people are still bitter over it. And it makes sense. Ember was one of the first nuking frames. If you hopped in a mission, Ember was there nuking. They nerfed her world on fire ability for range and energy, and it killed her almost immediately. Snuffed out that Ember. And now people are still upset about it, even though she got a rework in 2019 and then a big update in 2024, which helped her energy consumption. Now, leaving off with that, let's go over to her abilities. Her passive, receive 5% ability strength for every enemy within affinity range affected by heat status effect. And then Fireball, release a fire projectile that ignites enemies on contact. This increases your immolation meter by 1% per second. That will be important later. Immolation, protect Ember with flame armor that burns stronger over time, consuming energy once its meter is at full strength. Cast again to extinguish this flame. This is your damage reduction, and it increases with your immolation meter at a base of 40% up to a maximum of 85%. And the immolation meter increases by 0.5% per second. Again, that'll be important later. Fire Blast, slam the ground to create a wave of incinerating plasma that knocks back enemies and strips their armor. Armor stripping is absolutely fantastic. You're going to need to cast it twice to be able to full armor strip, which can be tedious considering the energy consumption. This actually decreases your immolation meter by 50%. Now, Inferno, command a flaming comet to crash down in front of Ember, engulfing enemies with a fire that can spread through their ranks. This increases your immolation meter by 3% per second. Now, what seems like a big fuck you, but actually isn't, is her energy per target. It's 10 per target. Now, this seems like it'd be a big problem because if you have like 20 enemies, that's 200 energy, but there's only a maximum of 10 targets allowed, meaning at most you'll be spending 100 energy, depending on your efficiency, of course. So it's not actually that bad of a deal, because if there's only one target and you want to cast the ultimate just to get an insane amount of damage off, you can cast this. It's only going to cost you 10 energy. Or if you for some reason want to get your immolation meter up really high, there's no targets, you can just continuously spam Inferno. It will cost you no energy whatsoever because it allows you to cast even when no targets are around, and then you can build up your immolation meter quite quickly. Now, building up your immolation meter obviously builds up your damage reduction at max to 85%, allowing for 85% damage reduction, which isn't that good, but it's better than nothing. But of course, this drains your energy exponentially, which leads me into the main point that people don't like about her, ignoring the fact of nostalgia from when she used to be the best frame in the game. And the main reason that people don't like her nowadays is her energy consumption. Now, each of her abilities require a pretty high level of energy. Her first ability requires 25 for a single fireball, her second requires 50 energy, her third requires 75 energy, and then finally her fourth requires 10 per target, up to 10 targets, which is pretty good, as I mentioned. And then finally, once her immolation meter is at max, she starts losing just a shit ton of energy, and it increases very quickly. So the main problem is that you're going to have to be focusing on not only her energy consumption, which can be remedied by subsuming an ability if you want to, for something like Bright Bonnet, but of course, not everybody wants to do that. And then once the meter reaches max, as you can see, it's at 90% now, and that's because I actually had a lot of ability strength. Once you have a certain amount of ability strength, it can be raised from 85% maximum to 90% maximum, which I think is stupid. Once the immolation meter gets to a certain level, you're going to actually have to focus on negating that, which will get rid of some of your damage reduction, which is problematic in higher level content. But you're going to have to focus on keeping that below max, otherwise you're going to run out of energy very quickly, which is just annoying. You're going to be mostly focusing on the bottom right of your screen and what's in front of you, just to make sure that you don't start running out of energy immediately, and to make sure that you don't die from having only 40% damage reduction. Which gets me on to the next point, the problem with it being 85%. I don't think that makes any sense. Why not just make it 90% damage reduction all the time with this ability activated? I get it's part of her gameplay mechanic, but that's what some people have a problem with. Now, I failed to mention this at the start of the video, but the problems I'm listing here I've gotten from region chat and Reddit posts. So everything I'm talking about now is mentioned from those two places, which isn't that good because they're all cracked out of their mind. But they all seem to be complaining about the same thing: her energy consumption and just late game survivability. With her damage reduction being tied to her immolation meter, which technically just actively starts killing her once it reaches 100%, and not having any energy efficiency abilities of her own, she's not that good as compared to other frames. The truth is that there's just better alternatives to going Ember. Yeah, she has armor reduction, which is fantastic. With her 3, you can cast armor reduction, but there are plenty of other frames that do just the same thing and better. Her 4 can nuke enemies, but other people can do it better. Her 2 activates damage reduction on yourself, but other frames do it better. There's nothing that she has that outclasses any other frame out there today. So the thought of going Ember doesn't cross many people's minds unless it's for, let's say, some superficial reasoning such as her skin. If you see somebody going Ember, it's mostly because they have the heirloom skin and not just because they have Ember herself. And you can't really blame them. I'm pretty sure that's what DE was going for. And now, honestly, I could go on for 30 minutes, maybe even longer, especially if I start talking about before her nerf. But unfortunately, the only big problem with her that most people have is her energy consumption and game mechanic revolving her immolation, and then finally just being outclassed by other frames. There's nothing else to really complain about when it comes to Ember, because all in all, she is a decent frame, and most people only hate on her because of the nostalgia of how she was 8 years ago. So with that being said, that's just about it. Until next time.